Time now for Focus. Today we have a report on the potential of Vietnam. Since 1990, the communist country's economic growth has averaged nearly 7% a year. Now it's poised to become Asia's next economic tiger. France, among the countries keen to boost economic cooperation. Clovis Kasali reports.
A few months after Barack Obama, it was François Hollande who travelled to Hanoi to meet his Vietnamese counterpart. Heads of state from around the world see Vietnam as a valuable business partner in the region, one with huge potential. The army and the Communist Party remain as powerful as ever, the key players to negotiate with. On this state visit, François Hollande submitted a list of political dissidents he would like to see freed, but much of the talks revolved around lucrative business deals and various partnerships. The communist regime has opened up to the West in a spectacular fashion.
There's a lot of collaboration with France, in particular in the fields of education, scientific and economic research. Vietnamese people get trained in France and then return, and it's the case for business managers also.
Still governed by a single party that tolerates little criticism, Vietnam has moved from state planning to free market. And it all began in the late 1980s with the Doi Moi policy, meaning renovation, with business at the heart of it all. And it took time to produce results. Now its Southeast Asian neighbours envy its growth rate of nearly 7%. And by 2020, Vietnam's middle class is set to double.
When you look at surveys among Vietnamese, they are much more pro-market capitalism than even Americans. And so sometimes it seems like there's not much of that socialist tradition here anymore, but it's not true. It actually still is a communist country in terms of protecting workers and trying to promote gender equality.
Hanoi is a capital bustling day and night. Authorities are working to develop public transport to fight the infamous traffic and heavy congestion on the roads. Vietnam has even more motorbikes than homes. Needless to say that added to the many factories, the air pollution level is one of the worst in the region. The south of the country is the industrial and business hub. Welcome to Ho Chi Minh City, once known as Saigon in colonial times when the French ruled Indochina. This is where the major international companies first invested. Famous brands, notably American ones, are setting up shop on many street corners. Residents are seeing their city rapidly change. Authorities have eased the process for foreigners to get started in Vietnam. Frenchman Sébastien Sicot has a small metalwork factory in the outskirts of Ho Chi Minh City. His clients are rich Vietnamese ready to pay for quality. He trains a handful of young locals, and authorities are also keen to capitalize on his knowledge.
There's 60% of the population under the age of 25, so authorities are starting to think about what to do with them. Now training is more focused on industries. Young people are not taught a particular job, but generally how to work in a factory. So they came to me to see how they can change their ways of training youngsters and do like in France, where you learn to be, say, a plumber, a carpenter or an electrician.
The transformation of communist Vietnam has revolutionized the lives of its youths who no longer need to move abroad to learn different skills and ways of thinking.
Compared to my parents' generation, which is very closed-minded, I'm learning many things, for example, with foreigners. It's opened my eyes on many levels. I'm glad and proud to be part of this new Vietnamese society, where there are many foreigners.
The rise of internet has also played a major role in changing mentalities, and it seems the communist authorities are letting users browse freely. An increasing number of foreign computer companies have set up their Southeast Asia offices in Vietnam, where prices are competitive and talent available.
Especially when it comes to the internet, it's a country that isn't closed at all, compared to other countries in Asia. There's no internet censorship here. The infrastructures are stable, and it's really, really dynamic. There are a lot of people working in the computer sector.
A kind of Vietnamese Silicon Valley, where the modern offices are in no way different to those you'd find in any Western capital. These developers have high hopes.
Internet is open for everyone, so it's give very good chance for young people to learn, to reach a new knowledge, and to get them to the level equally with the other countries. Also about some of the Vietnamese American, they came back and they run business here, they invest in here.
Many believe the development of internet in Vietnam will shape the country's future. The gap between the old and the new guard is clear. Those who've experienced wars and the communist revolution see the young Vietnamese making full use of new media and technology. The rise of internet and easier access to information are bound to affect how Vietnam deals with the challenges ahead.
Joining me now in the studio, Jean-François Dimelieu, the president of Asia Centre. Hello, thank you very much for your time. Now, our report there focuses on Vietnam's young population. Could you talk us through what Vietnam has going for it? That is clearly a big asset, its young population.
Well, it's an asset, definitely. As we could see in China's rise, if we compare Vietnam to China, which is very often conducted in terms of comparison, Vietnam is exactly at the same stage as China used to be in the 80s and 90s, with a huge population of young people, making available a large workforce. And that is why, of course, big hopes are placed on Vietnam, and especially secondary sector industry and high-tech, as was just shown. Indeed, this is one of the assets of Vietnam. We have to remember that about 80 million over population, among which, as was just mentioned, a large chunk is very young people. This being said, you have huge disparities between the two parts of Vietnam, and you also have huge disparities between the various levels of wealth. Vietnam is still a very poor country, actually, in terms of average GDP per capita. So it has a huge potential, but this potential still has to be developed.
Is geography a factor? You mentioned China before. Is being close to China something that's benefiting Vietnam as well in its development?
It's a big contradiction because, of course, Vietnam is politically close to China, supposedly, but geographically has many reasons to oppose China, as we can just see now, because there is a dispute over islands which were just given away by Vietnam during the times of Vietnam War, and now are reclaimed by Vietnam exactly the same way as Philippines had put a claim on some waters in the South China Sea. So proximity to China is, of course, an asset, because lots of foreign investment going outside of China to Southeast Asia are going to Vietnam. So Vietnam is one of the big recipients of Chinese investment. However, there is a contradiction to be resolved where the two countries diverge, and that is to be watched in the future, is that US just lifted the embargo, any embargo, on arms export to Vietnam, when obviously you still have an embargo on China. So on the defense situation, proximity to China is also something to watch.
What does Vietnam need to do to be the next China or the next South Korea and avoid going perhaps the way of Brazil? Because we had very high hopes for Brazil, and that didn't really turn out to very well.
Actually, Vietnam did a lot already, and your report mentioned foreign investment, and that was basically the leverage for the kickoff of China in the 1980s. That Vietnam included in the Doi Moi policy, as was mentioned. Education also is a big element of raising the level of wealth in the population.
The state invests quite heavily in education.
Absolutely, that is being conducted. One thing which probably needs to be sorted out is the pragmatic approach to politics. Vietnam has conducted a very pragmatic approach to some issues, which, for example, China has not conducted. If you look at the religion acceptance in Vietnam, is much wider than in China, especially in relation with the Catholic Church in Vietnam is more open. But still, the Communist Party is of course blamed for being very corrupted still in Vietnam. So there is a cleanup probably to be conducted. It has started, and that is one of the key points. And also the disparities between North and South Vietnam, which still exist.
And a quick word on tourism. How important is that to the country's development and economic prosperity?
Well, it's very specific. It's very specific in Vietnam. Of course, the state has a big hand on many parts of the economy, but as was shown, it's a light hand, as opposed to China, where there is a lighter and lighter hand, but still in many sectors. So there is a trend to liberalize and privatize the economy. So the government is less present, but there is still a high degree of confidence to establish among partners coming from outside of Southeast Asia or even Asia. Europeans particularly have been slow in coming back to Vietnam, including France. And that's the reason why President Hollande went to Vietnam after only 2 other visits by French presidents. It was already like 12 years since the last president, that was Chirac, visited Vietnam.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jean-François Dumelier.